Hello and welcome to my 18th CPD Coffee Time with me, Dr Tina RAE. Today we're going to focus on creativity and flow and think about how creativity and our experience of flow can overall promote our well-being and achievement, not just for our children and young people, but also for us as adults who are nurturing and supporting them. This session is intended primarily as a follow-on from the positive psychology one that I did earlier in this series, so I'm hoping that it will reinforce some of those key motivators for us to actually engage in more flow in our lives. Just to flag up again briefly, I was formerly a teacher. I'm currently working as a consultant psychologist for Compass Fostering, and also I write prolifically, many of my publications with Nurture UK, my charity of choice. I've also written extensively for Hinton House Publishers with the wonderful Sarah Miles. So once again, these are just a very small sample of the work that I've actually produced with them. And I would flag up that building positive thinking habits and bouncing back and coping with change in particular, alongside the essential resilience and wellbeing toolkit for early years, are all publications that I would suggest have some links directly to this particular session, emanating from the key principles and core objectives of the positive psychology movement and approach. So the aims today are basically to reflect upon the main purpose of education, being that those of creativity, developing the ability for us all to be creative and engaging meaningful, purposeful activity. I'm also going to highlight at the outset some of the impacts and concerns around COVID-19, which are clearly ongoing, and reflect upon the need for nurture safety alongside the need for creativity in our young people's lives going forwards, particularly as they begin to transition back into school from September onwards during this pandemic, which is clearly ongoing and clearly a huge matter of concern, I think, for all of us. I'm also going to think about the argument for the meaningful application of imagination and what that is, and present that to you, and highlight the implications for education in general. I think this is a topic that very timely needs to be reflected on at this point in time. I'm also going to define explicitly the link between happiness and creativity, and introduce this concept from Csikszentmihalyi's work of flow, and the need for us all to develop our flow pans and have greater levels of flow in our lives on a daily basis. So once again, it's being presented within the context of this current pandemic. And just this morning, as I'm recording this, we've heard about lockdowns up north beginning again, and outbreaks intermittently across the country. And I know that for many of our children and young people, it's hugely concerning. They're thinking about going back to school, many of them, and worrying about that already. Many of them have had a very, very checkered experience of the last 3 to 4 months. For some, it's been very, very problematic and has impacted negatively upon their mental health, but others not quite so bad, in the sense that they have inherent levels of resilience and very, very good support structures overall. But it can't be underestimated that we're not out of the woods yet, and this is ongoing for all of us. Once again, I'd make reference to the Young Minds research, and I think, again, flagging up that 2,000 young people with existing conditions that they surveyed in March 2020 were very, very clear about the fact that the pandemic was having a really profound effect on them. They had their mental health issues diagnosed clearly post-COVID, but all of them were reporting on increased levels of anxiety, problems with sleep, panic attacks, and more frequent urges to self-harm. So this is hugely concerning for all of us, and I think that we're not going to be fully aware of the impact until we kind of are at least a few months down the line from this period. The COAST study at Oxford University, however, also identified 1/5 of children not feeling safe to leave their homes, but that would suggest that 4/5 do feel safe. So again, just flagging this up once again, it's very, very important to factor into our thinking around this whole issue and current debate around the pandemic, is that some of these children, 4/5 of them, clearly would not have had issues and do not feel that they have issues with leaving the home or going back to school. So I think we've got to be very, very clear. This is on a continuum, and there are resilient children, young people out there who are not being impacted so severely. So the Children's Society also, however, have flagged up that there is clearly now an issue for many of our children and young people. Pre-COVID, the Children's Society had found that 1 in 8 children and young people were saying that they generally felt unhappy with their lives in the UK at the moment. However, since the coronavirus crisis, this has increased. So now it's almost 1 in 5 children who are saying that they feel generally unhappy with their lives as a whole. So this issue of mental health, this issue of well-being is clearly ongoing, and I think we have to be very, very clear that we really do focus on what actually works, what the evidence base is telling us in terms of supporting and protecting and nurturing children's mental health and well-being, giving them the capacity to be able to manage some of these stresses more effectively. What we do need to do is factor into our thinking that we ensure that they can engage in what I call the 4 trauma recovery steps. And the first one is of self-regulation, so understanding how to regulate themselves, to ground themselves, to make use of mindfulness strategies, thinking effectively, so tools from CBT, but also being able to visualize a more hopeful future, etc. They need to actually also be moving more, and that terms of moving more physically, having more exercise. The endorphin factors from that are very, very valuable, and there's a direct link to mental health and well-being. Understanding how to use effective stress management tools and strategies, and being able to connect with other people. And if those 4 trauma recovery steps are permeating our approach as we enter back into schools in September, I think that we're giving children the best possible opportunity then to actually recover from some of the very difficult experiences and heightened levels of stress and anxiety that they may well have been experiencing. And certainly the Children's Society report would suggest that that is the case. So within all of this, I think it's really, really important now that we don't lose sight of this need for more creativity. There has been an awful lot of debate around catch-up, this notion of catch-up academically, and as we all know, children will not engage academically if they are unregulated. If they're being taught by unregulated adults, they will also not be able to unregulate themselves. They will not be able to actually develop the skills to do that because it has not been modelled to them. And I think within all of this, there is this real need for us to focus on the things that actually produce those chemicals, those feel-good endorphins, those chemicals that make children feel happier, more content, more alive, and give them a sense of real meaning and purpose. And we get this from creativity. I think it's really, really more important than ever that what is part and parcel of the curriculum on a daily basis is some level of creativity. So what is the purpose of education? One of our ministers, our politicians, remarked a few weeks ago that it was to get a good job, and I felt I really had to take issue with that. So I took to social media on this issue because I obviously cannot agree that that is the purpose of education. The purpose of education is to enable us to live lives of meaning, creativity, of purpose, and to feel that we're valued and we can contribute out there in the social context. There are multiple aims of education: political, economic, social, cultural, and personal, but the main focus should not be purely vocational. It should really be about developing these lifelong learners passionate about their interests, nurturing those interest, skills and knowledge across a wide range of topics which are personally meaningful and individualised to each student. I think this is key to education. It's key to ensuring that the purpose of education is really met. And the ultimate goal, really, in my view, should be to prepare our children and young people for life in all its complexities. This is not simply about training for a job, and we really need to shift away from this now, particularly in this current context of this COVID-19 pandemic. So what do we think about when we hear the word creative or creativity? Many of us, lots of words come to mind for many of us, such as brilliant, genius, someone who's really talented, innovative or gifted. And they're all the kind of words that we would use to describe exceptional types of mental performance. Some people do believe that it's purely the province of geniuses, so the Einsteins, the Botticellis, Leonardo da Vinci's of this world. But creative learning is in fact the essence of higher order thinking, and it's a practical life skill that needs to be nurtured in all of our children, young people and adults alike from a very, very early age through our formal education processes. So this is an essential in my view. So what can it be defined as? A new combination of mental activities expressed in the world. So at the individual level, the bottom-up approach, reductionism, but it is mental activities expressed in the world. And it's the creation of a new idea, something that's really valuable at a societal level. So again, something that is going to be of value to everybody else out there. And this social view contends that it's not just emerging from the individual human mind, but also emerges from social processes, interactions, working together. So again, this focus on collegiate practice, getting children to work and to be able to cooperate effectively is also essential. So in Csikszentmihalyi's system view, there are three key components of this creative process. So first of all, there's the domain, which is the set of knowledge. So these are the rules, methods and assumptions. So it could be maths, history, engineering, economics, etc. This is where the acceptance of the creative idea can lead to change. At the second level component, there is this field, the group of experts. These are the ones who determine if this new idea should be accepted as part of the set of knowledge, the domain. So again, very often they might be people in science, historians or researchers, so experts in the field who will look and see if this is giving us the right kind of evidence-based. And of course then the individual, the one person who initially will generate the ideas. The individual will come up with a great transformative idea, but has first mastered the domain. So they have that set of knowledge, they understand the key principles. And I think that's really, really important. It's about deep understanding, a different level of understanding the domain and the rules by which that domain is absolutely organised. So when did this word first appear in the English dictionary, I suppose? In the 1875 text, actually, of the History of Dramatic English Literature by Adolphus William Ward. And Engel and Taylor also state that this concept of imagination then emerged from England and Germany during the late 18th century. At that point in time, it was viewed as what we would call the quality of mind, which was responsible for originality and key, central to this modern concept of creativity. And given all this, other definitions of creativity could be the meaningful application of imagination, or the process of generating original ideas that have value to society. So for me, that would probably be my key definition at this point in time. It's the meaningful application of imagination, or the process of generating original ideas that have value, they contribute, they make a difference. So again, there's something about the moral imperative here, I think, for us as human beings to create ideas that really do have value and make a difference to our fellow men. And reflecting on that definition, I just want to show you this quote from Albert Einstein, which I think is interesting. Imagination is more important than knowledge, for knowledge is limited to all we know and understand, or we now know and understand, while imagination embraces the entire world and all there ever will be to know and understand. So it's much, much bigger. It's not limiting us to this one point in time. Now, much of these first few slides are taken from the work of Sir Ken Robinson, who I would obviously strongly recommend that you, if you're interested in this area, do look at this reference here. He talks about imagination as the primary gift of human consciousness, and the fact that it's a unique human quality, the essence of higher order thinking. And it's the result of a highly developed nervous system and cerebral cortex. So what we need to think about is how we use creativity in novel and meaningful ways to explore new possibilities for ourselves and for our society. And given that this is something that we hold dear and value, and we believe to be an absolute necessity in order to really ensure that our society develops in a way that is useful, is pragmatic, is meaningful for all involved, we've got to think about how we foster creativity in our educational systems when they are historically and sadly for many currently conformed, defined by this conformity, this standardization, hyper specialization. I mean, getting specialized very, very early on, when I think sometimes that maybe is a real error, and it doesn't actually help or support this notion of creativity and imagination and fostering that in our children and young people. Creative learning, according to Sir Ken Robinson, is as important in education as literacy. And from his perspective, we should therefore treat it with the same status. Now, if we had one quote from this presentation today that I want people to take away, it's that one, because I think this really does resonate now in this current context where the pressure is on to focus on the 3 R's, to focus on this notion of cognitive catch-up. But creativity is as important as literacy, and we need to actually ensure that we treat it in the same way in our curriculum, in our schools. For those of you interested in underpinning research in this area, Sawyer in 2012 conducted an exhaustive study of creativity research. And what he concluded was that creativity involves both divergent and convergent thinking, and it usually occurs incrementally over time. So it's bit by bit, step by step, generally doesn't happen in one fell swoop. And it is a result of hard work and commitment to solving a problem. And again, this is why I think for our children and young people, in terms of developing resilience and understanding that hard work, commitment are really key qualities to be fostered, nurtured and prized and valued in order to produce something really good and of value. In order to do something really well, we have to engage in that 4-letter word work. Very, very important. It's directed, intentional, rational process. And very often, what Sawyer was saying, the research showed us, was that hyper-specialization can stifle creativity. It means you're unaware of related knowledge. Your view is too narrow. So although it's largely domain-specific, cross-fertilization can enhance creativity, and this is why this need for a flexible creative approach in our schools is essential. And Sawyer also highlighted the fact that contrary to popular myths and misjudged beliefs, I think, there is no creativity gene. It doesn't just occur in the right half of the brain. It involves basic psychological and social processes which are combined together in new, novel, complex ways. So the imagination, the ability to form new images and thoughts not available through the senses or not possible in conscious reality, occurs at an individual level in our minds, whilst innovation, so putting into practice that new idea or product in a group or society, occurs at the social level. And what Sawyer did was also integrated framework of major theories of creativity, so that what emerged were 8 stages of the creative process. So at stage 1 of this creative process is about identifying the problem or the opportunity. And they're very rarely neatly presented. There's something chaotic about them. And the ones that require the most creativity and the most flexibility from us as human beings are the ones that are unstructured. And these can't really be solved by just one discipline or past experience alone. So again, reinforcing this need for this flexibility and cross-fertilization. Stage 2 is about acquiring knowledge and skills relevant to that specific problem. So Gardner showed us that creative breakthroughs usually occurred after about 10 years of deep immersion in the domain. So think about that. That's a long, long time to really learn your stuff, as I would put it. And Erickson asserted that world-class performance in any domain requires at least 10,000 hours of deliberate practice. So again, thinking very, very carefully about this 10,000 hours. I talked to many, many parents over the years who are really keen that their children should become very good at something. They show a wee bit of talent for, say, the piano or music or creative subjects, etc. And they kind of think that somehow they're going to get really, really brilliant at it and be an expert if they just practice for a few half-hour sessions a week. This is not the case. We need to really factor into our thinking just how long it takes to achieve excellence. So these studies suggest that prolonged intensive immersion is really required for higher creative performance. I overheard once a very good friend who's a violinist talking about how she practiced, and she is working at a professional level. I don't want to divulge her name, but basically she was saying that in order to really get something right, there were 3 bars in this particular concerto. She practiced for about 16 hours in a row, and that enabled her to get it right. It doesn't just happen by magic. We have to actually reinforce this with our children, that in order to get really, really good at something, you have to work really, really hard. So think about at least 10,000 hours of deliberate practice. So stage 3 is about acquiring this broad range of knowledge related to that particular problem. So being able to see the overlaps and the relationships across the domains, using what we would call analogic thinking, so making analogies across those domains and applying concepts from related domains in order to generate a variety of ideas. Stage 4 is about then allowing time for deep reflection. How often do we ensure that children have time for reflection in schools? I wonder, maybe something else to really think about and reflect on yourself. Stage 5, generating a variety of ideas. Stage 6, combining them in new ways. And 7, selecting the ones that are meaningful ideas based on feasible criteria. And it's stage 8. This is about externalize, test, evaluate, and then refine this creative idea. So imagine how to implement it. So e.g. the proof of concept. Identify all the things you need in order to do it, to implement it. Predict any possible reactions to implementing it, and then determine how best to test, evaluate and refine it. And I would say as a psychologist, this is clearly what we would do if we were developing an intervention, for example, for children and young people, in order to generate the evidence base, why it works, what makes it work, giving us some proof that it works, and if it doesn't work so well, working out how we can refine it. So what's the challenge for us as educators? In essence, from my view, it's about nourishing and developing children's natural creativity, because my goodness, they have it, loads of it in spades. And actually what's been wonderful about the lockdown is some of the creativity that's become apparent when children have been engaging in activities that they love, that give them this sense of flow and well-being over this period. And I think it's really, really important. Some of our children and young people will have been doing stuff that they haven't had the opportunity to do in school for a long time, and they will have felt very safe and they'll have felt very reassured, whilst also being able to produce some beautiful works of art, music, poetry, engaging activities that really give them a sense of achievement. And for some of them, there's going to be a real tension about going back into a school if they feel that, again, that creativity, that ability to follow some of their real passions and interests is now going to be curtailed, and the focus is purely going to be on this notion of academic catch-up. We know that there are lots of different ways that we can help practitioners promote creativity, however, in our children and young people. So providing those regular opportunities for hands-on experimentation, problem solving, discussion and collaborative work. Clearly now in a social distanced way, but this is absolutely essential. And of course, our teachers who are engaged in best practice, and there are many, many, many of them out there, will be doing this now. Actively encouraging them to question, make connections, imagine what might be possible by exploring different ideas, and really facilitating open discussion and questioning, using those open-ended questions. So what if, how might you, what might happen? Really, really open-ended. So as I've said already for probably about 3 times so far in this presentation, that I think most teachers, most people who are engaged in fostering learning, well-being within our children and young people would say that it is possible to cultivate creativity, but many of us have felt really stifled by this highly standardized curriculum. And many teachers do tend to associate creativity with the arts and humanities and not so much with the STEM fields. And this has been an issue, I think, and it needs to be something that we kind of address and we really focus on now, because we know schools themselves are in essence the perfect place to cultivate creativity, because they are the main vehicle for delivering this formal learning. And it depends, this creativity, on mastering a domain. So research suggests that mastery takes at least 10 years of study in a given domain. So let's not lose sight of that, those 10,000 hours again. So the real thing to remember here, I think, is this notion that schools are the perfect place to create and cultivate creativity. We need to hold on to that, and we need to actually be very strong about factoring that into our thinking and our delivery now as we go back in September. So creativity. Ken Robinson says, teaching for creativity involves asking open-ended questions where there may be multiple solutions. So working in groups on collaborative projects, using imagination to explore possibilities, making connections between different ways of seeing different perspectives, exploring those ambiguities and tensions that may lie in between them. And that encourages this respectful dialogue and questioning. And that's really, really important, that we teach children and young people how to do that. Basic social skills, but also this notion that we can be empathic. We can hold on to our own gratification, our own needs. We can listen to others. We can actually come to compromise, problem solve together. And really, this encourages this inquiry-based, meaningful learning that is the essence of ensuring that our children and young people can be creative in their lives. Question assumptions and encourage different viewpoints and perspectives in order to encourage cross-fertilization of ideas is absolutely essential to this whole process. So things that we can do, all of us can do this. We can encourage peer teaching. We can encourage children and young people to work collaboratively together. We can provide a safe place to take these sensible risks in the learning process, and foster self-efficacy and intrinsic motivation, this sense of being autonomous, but also motivated from my own deep desire from within to learn, and gaining that sense of well-being and a sense of value from doing something that I think has value and makes me feel good and excited. So being inclusive and respectful of diversity in all its forms, this is something that is absolutely paramount at this point in time. Giving those opportunities and focusing on those opportunities that enable children to work in unstructured and ill-defined problem-solving activities. So not actually being so clear and specific. Also encourage self-regulated learning and active participation in the learning process. So you're in control of it, kids. This is your project. This is the way that you do it. And you work out your plan of action, how you're going to do it. You're going to share out the tasks. You're going to work out who's going to do what, etc. So there's a level of autonomy and ownership over it. And I think creative teaching and learning should be tailored to every single subject, not just the creative arts subjects. So what can we do? We can set high expectations for performance that match our own knowledge and skills, that of our children and young people. We can ensure that there are extrinsic and intrinsic rewards for performance. These are both important, but I think intrinsic rewards are probably more important than ever at this point in time. I mean, from my perspective, they always have been. And I think we do need to be just a bit careful about extrinsic rewards. For some of our children, young people, they are not as important. And I think we need to really build up this notion that it's about us feeling good about ourselves and what we're doing, and that really should be our reward. Integrating knowledge using interdisciplinary concepts, once again, is key to this creativity. Looking for those overarching patterns and the underlying principles to the problem or the topic in hand. We need to ensure, absolutely, that there is dialogue, collaboration, and mentoring. We can mentor the children and young people, but they can become mentors for each other. Engagement in sound argumentation and logical reasoning underpins this creative learning, as does this deep personal reflection of your own understanding of the particular topic. Ultimately, what we want to do is foster what I would call proper work attitudes, Okay, how to work properly, effectively and well, how to apply yourself, how to keep going, how not to give up, how to show true grit, and how to develop the study habits necessary in order to complete tasks and keep going and effectively plan out over time how we're going to do something that might be a bigger project. We also, I think, need to ensure that learning is personally meaningful and interesting to our children and young people. And if you think about them coming into school in this September, when many of them will be feeling slightly unregulated, perhaps more nervous, more stressed than usual, this is going to be more important than ever that they're engaging in activities that are meaningful and interesting and engaging, because this by default enables them to be able to self-soothe more effectively. So I'm now just going to take a slightly different slant after this overview of creativity and the practical things that we can and should be doing as professionals in order to ensure that our children develop in this area. I also think that there's a direct link clearly between happiness and creativity. We know that people who ostensibly are happy tend to do things in which they feel stimulated and creative, and they often do this by going through this process of absorption, adventure and achievement. And this directly links back to this whole area of creativity itself, that you get absorbed in something, you do your 10,000 hours, you're getting better and better and better at it, but you are totally immersed in it, and it's exciting because you don't know where it's going to end up sometimes. And also when you do actually achieve, there is a real sense of achievement. Sometimes people will experience what Csikszentmihalyi calls this state of flow, and he wrote about this in his book The Psychology of Optimal Experience. And I would really strongly recommend, if you are interested in this area, that this is a book that is well worth buying and perhaps sharing with colleagues as well, part of your school library. We know that happy people also tend to continue to learn. They become the lifelong learners, and there's a direct link between being a lifelong learner, happiness and contentment, and achieving a sense of meaning and purpose in our lives. What does it do? If we're continually learning, being creative, being able to investigate things and feel a sense of autonomy in doing this, we feel more alive. We feel that we can actually develop in our lives and in our work per se. So at this point in the presentation, if you're doing this on your own or you're doing it with colleagues, it might be worth just stopping and pausing for a wee bit and thinking about what you actually value about feeling creative, when you feel creative, what you think this is, what it means to you, and what you think you currently do that you would class as a creative activity. So a very simple exercise for you now in terms of thinking about this notion of creativity. When is it that you feel most creative? Is it when you're out in the garden, when you're painting, drawing, writing, you are leading on a project, you're teaching? I think teaching is a hugely creative profession. Delivering something by a specific deadline, so you've got a sense of purpose, you've got to get going on it, or whatever it is. But what I'd like you to do is just stop, jot down some notes now. Just describe when you feel most creative. And then think about how you can do more of these things, and then think about some of the benefits of taking those specific steps. So I'll give you the framework next. So just try to think of 3 different times when I feel most creative. So I feel most creative personally when I'm writing. I feel most creative when I am thought storming for a new project, a new book that I just am so excited about. I feel creative when I'm cooking, actually. It's something, it's my hobby. It's one of the pastimes that I do that actually I love. I love putting new things together and coming up with new flavors. Then stop and think about the steps that you might be able to take now in order to do more of these things. What is it that you can do in order to do more of these creative activities that really do make you feel good and actually produce more of these endorphins, these really good chemicals that we all need in our lives? And I would suggest we need them more than ever in this current context. And then think about the benefits of doing these things, what they will be. And again, write these down. I think it's very, very important. Sometimes we are saying that we're going to do things, we reflect on things, but we don't actually put them down on paper. And very often we need to go back and see it. We need to see it on a page so we can say, ah, yes, that's what I said I would do. That's what I said. That's how I said I would do it. These are the benefits of doing it. So just write down the benefits of doing these things, what they would be for you, and try and focus on the feelings of well-being that you might have. And if one of your activities that you think you're being creative in is actually sporting, for example, it may be around just feeling good physically, getting fitter, feeling happier, etc., etc. But think about what those benefits would be to you personally. And it might be something, if you're doing this as a group, that you would be willing to share with each other and be very interesting to compare notes. So again, just to flag up, this is Csikszentmihalyi's book, Flow, The Psychology of Optimal Experience, just in case you wanted to make reference to it. And of course, the activities that I'm presenting today emanate from this particular publication. I think his work for me is pretty seminal because it gives us one of these keys to really helping people to clarify when they feel creative. And it's a real good, a vital, important starting point. Csikszentmihalyi spent a long time studying when people felt truly absorbed in an experience and really performed excellent, fine work. So he studied artists, painters, sculptors, surgeons, athletes, etc., including people who were recovering from accidents and people from all walks of life. This wasn't purely aimed at an intelligentsia of any sort. And he described and presented many of these examples in his book, Flow. So it is really useful to have a look at these, but incredibly interesting to read. So this concept of flow, many of the people that he interviewed described their feeling of being creative in the process of what they were doing as being carried away by a force greater than myself, or being in a current, being in flow. And he chose the last of the analogies, so this notion of flow, because he felt it was the most simple. And also highlighted how sometimes it might just seem that flow is just happening. But I'm going to just in the next few slides show you some of the steps that people often take in order to create that sense of flow. And sometimes I think we have to engineer this, and we should be engineering it for ourselves, because if we follow these principles, then I think we're going to be more creative. I think we're going to have more chance, more opportunity to actually develop something, really finish something, be finishers, and show our products and show what we've produced, and really get a sense of fulfillment from it, because we're doing something of value that really matters. So the next few slides, I'm going to show you this exercise that you can use to explore times when you experience flow, and then try to follow the principles that you come up with here in order to feel more creative in the future. So what he found, Csikszentmihalyi, was that people enjoyed a sense of flow, being in the moment, being totally absorbed, not being unaware of time passing, when they were tackling something that they had a chance of completing. They were really concentrating on the task in hand. They had very clear goals. They knew what they wanted to achieve right at the outset. And as they were working, they would get immediate kind of feedback from it. He also highlighted how they experienced this deep and effortless involvement that seemed to remove them from frustrations of everyday life. So this is one of those key aspects of it, that they enjoy this sense of autonomy over their actions, feeling in control. They find their concern for themselves disappear, but it's very, very important that paradoxically what really does emerge more is their sense of self. That becomes much, much stronger. So they don't need to worry about, say, going to the loo or worrying about not having food or a drink, etc., but their sense of self emerges stronger from that. And they find this experience is so enjoyable that that sense of time going, it's just like it's gone. You don't know where it's gone. I've been painting for 3 hours. Where did that morning go? So he identified these 10 factors that accompany this experience of flow. But while many of them may be present, it's not actually essential that they're all there in order for flow to occur for us. We don't have to have all of those in place. So clear goals here, as I said earlier, these are the first five factors: strong concentration, intrinsically rewarding. This is something I really love doing. I have a sense of serenity, no self-consciousness, and I have a sense of timelessness when I'm engaged and I'm experiencing flow. the immediate feedback, as I said earlier, but also knowing that this task is doable. I can do it. So there's got to be a balance between skill level and the challenge presented. So a sense of autonomy, I'm in control of it and the outcome. I'm not aware of my physical needs, that is immaterial, and I'm really focused on that activity. So this next activity invites you to explore how you can continue to experience a sense of flow. And I'm asking you here to describe a specific activity where you experience flow, give some examples, and some specific things you believe you may do right then, so the principles you follow in order to experience flow, and then some of the specific things you can do to follow some of these principles in the future. So the next slides will take us through this step by step. So again, pen and pencil or pen and we journal, whatever you want to do in terms of recording this, but I would suggest that you do it and you write it down. So think about a specific activity where you experience a sense of flow and give some examples when this has happened. And it could be in your teaching, it could be in a creative outlet that you have. And what are the specific things that you do right then in that moment in time? What are the principles that you follow to experience that sense of flow? So again, try to record at least 3 key principles that you would adhere to in order to ensure your sense of flow. Finally, in this activity, you can then identify the specific things that you could do in order to follow those key principles and maybe experience a sense of flow in the future. What are these specific things? So again, I would suggest try to do a minimum of 3. And also think about how you might actually use this, particularly with teenagers, young people. This is the kind of activity that I think we can engage in with our young people so that they can also themselves understand flow, but also begin to work out how they can engage more frequently in flow and follow key core principles to ensure that this happens for them on a regular basis. So a takeaway activity from this session, I want you to create your flow plans. So choosing activities that provide you with flow and timetable them into your week. This is a bit like activity schedule. I would do an activity schedule for a child who's anxious, who needs to be taught about the connection between doing things you love that make you feel good and your overall sense of well-being. So trying to give yourself a dose 3 times a day, making sure that you specify where, when, the specific timings, and with whom you'll engage in these activities. So creating a balance between individual, group, social, and work-based elements. So this is a takeaway. It's a key central takeaway, and I would suggest that you really try to have a go at doing this, and then have a go at actually working to this plan on a weekly basis and see how it goes and review it at the end of the week. So in conclusion about, in terms of thinking about creativity in education, we know that good teachers and educational professionals know that it's their role to engage and inspire their children and young people. That in itself, according to Ken Robinson, is a creative process. I believe that. Like happiness and meaning, creativity is a quality that's got to be cultivated and worked on over many years. Think about the 10,000 hours. And like happiness and meaning, creativity is a state we consciously make happen in spite of life's adversities, including this current context of this COVID pandemic, what we're all having to manage at the moment. And I would suggest that given this current context, it's clearly more important than ever that we engage in creativity and really foster this in our children and young people. So finally, I think as human beings, children, young people, adults alike, we need to consciously seek out experiences that lead to greater happiness, meaning, and creativity. And the 3 things definitely go together. Happiness, meaning, and creativity evolve over the course of a lifetime if we're willing to tenaciously pursue it. So this notion of not giving up, true grit, going at it and keeping focused in our minds on the fact that it takes 10,000 hours to get really good in terms of that individual domain that we're working in. It's the great challenge of life, in essence, I feel. And I would suggest now, given the current COVID context, it is more important than ever that we really begin to do this effectively. So please take that away as a thought, and please discuss this. Please go away and think very carefully about how you may want to reflect on increasing creativity in your own life, but also ensuring that as we navigate our way back into schools in September, we are making sure, absolutely certain for sure, that our children and young people have access to creativity and meaning on a daily basis. So thank you once again for listening, and I really hope this has been useful. It's been a quite tight focus today, but I really think this is a topic that really should be coming to the forefront now in terms of our thinking as we navigate our way back to schools this September. So thank you once again, and I hope you join me on the next CPD Coffee time.